Coming up next is Alva Mother. She is a partner at DLA Piper, and she's been on the Brewbound program in the past at our Brewbound Live event. Alva, welcome.
Hello. Good to see you.
Thanks for joining the live stream. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, happy to be here.
So what are we talking about today? What were you talking about today, I should say?
I'm like, well, you're asking the question.
That's
so
right.
I didn't know what we were talking about, but so I'm here to give a presentation on cannabis and beer. It's going to be sort of the California version of the talk that I gave at CBC in Nashville, because that's sort of something that a lot of people are trying to do right now, and there's a fair amount of confusion about what is allowable, what isn't allowable, what you have to do,
right.
kinds of questions I answer all the time.
Well, I mean, it has become sort of the topic du jour,
yeah.
Cannabis, and we're seeing, some interest from beer companies. We're seeing it mostly on the larger side, Constellation, Molson Coors. Lagunitas has their partnership with CannaCraft, and they make the Hi-Fi Hops product. How do you see all of this developing over the next couple years, and what's permissible? They obviously, companies want to be innovative,
right.
But what are they allowed to do?
Right. So I think kind of on a long-term basis, it's going to continue to be something that people want to look at. I mean, a few years ago, alcohol companies were sort of terrified about the legalization of cannabis and just saying, how is this going to affect us? How is this going to affect our sales? I think more people are saying, well, how can this help us? How can we sort of join this wave that's coming, right? I mean, legalization, Canada is now fully legalized, across the whole country. I think sort of the tide has turned on the state level in terms of, just people seeing that there's so much public support for legalized cannabis, and governments are looking at, a great tax revenue that they didn't have before. So I think alcohol companies are saying, let's get involved in this, and whether it's, actually looking at taking over and extending those same kind of skill sets into the cannabis space, or if it's just using those ingredients. And in terms of the actual products, I think we're not going to see a day where THC is allowed in alcohol. I mean, I just think that from a regulatory perspective, that would just be too difficult. We can't, put caffeine in alcohol as it is. So right. I don't think that's going to change. But I do think people are going to continue to be creative in terms of, different derivatives, whether it's CBD or, which if it's cannabis, you can't do. But, if cannabis is no longer a controlled one substance, then, that could come online as a possibility.
So is it mostly based on what happens federally, or, are we still looking at state-based regulations? Because, we have the Wine and Spirits Wholesalers Association advocating for state, the regulations being at the state level.
Right.
But there is still the TTB to worry about.
Yeah.
How does somebody navigate all this if they want to pursue it?
Yeah, so it's complicated right now, and most of it really is the federal government being sort of the main sort of block in terms of what you can do, because the feds, TTB has to follow what the DEA says. And DEA says that, marijuana and all of its derivatives, including CBD, is a controlled one substance. And until that changes, it doesn't matter what happens at the state level, because as a brewer, winery, distillery, you still have to get formula approval if you want to put any of those products in your alcohol. And I think that's been one point of confusion, that people think, well, if I'm sitting in California and I'm only making a product that I'm going to sell in a limited release at my tap room, and marijuana is legal here, then why do I have to deal with the formula approval from TTB? But you do. So I think that we can get TTB out of the way, but then you're still going to have state-by-state regulations the same way we do in alcohol. And California has actually taken a more conservative perspective than the TTB has in terms of what you can put into alcohol. Specifically, TTB will allow you to put hemp-based CBD in alcohol, which is if you go on the market and you see CBD beer, it's hemp-based CBD that it is. But California has said no. That, for this state, and it's more of an FDA-related issue in terms of food additives, but it's taken that position. So if you're sitting in California, you can't even put hemp-based CBD in your alcohol.
But there are hemp beers. I mean, New Belgium has a very popular hemp beer. And actually out in Vermont, there was an issue with, I believe it was Long Trail, had made a CBD beer as well.
Right.
And I think they had actually even put it out on the market, and I don't know if they had to recall all of it.
Yeah.
But, they basically got slapped on the wrist.
Well, I think what's happened, and I've talked to folks at the TTB about this, and I think a couple of things are going on. I think TTB right now is seeing this trend, and what they're doing is they are sending cease and desist letters. They're just trying to get the word out to folks that you can't do this. And if you want to do it, because you can put the hemp products in your beer, there is a whole policy and a procedure that you have to go through where you give a lab analysis to TTB. You're able to show there's no traces of THC. And if you go through, that policy, then you can have the hemp products. But you have to go through the policy. And that's what New Belgium did.
Right.
But it takes a long time, and I think some folks don't want to do it for a small release that's can have the perspective of ask forgiveness later.
Right. Now, what is stopping breweries from exploring the non-alcoholic space and making THC-infused beverages or CBD-infused beverages, but in the form of a non-alcoholic water or a soda? Because we see it from Lagunitas, but again, it's a partnership with CannaCraft, and as I understand, they're basically just supplying them with hoppy water. Right. The water gets transported to the CannaCraft facility and then infused with the THC and the CBD. So it's not actually happening on site at Lagunitas.
Right.
So, I mean, maybe help me understand why a brewery couldn't do it on the non-alcoholic side at their facility. Why is that?
Well, I mean, again, it's going to be a state-by-state issue, but, we're sitting in California, and I'm all up on California law right now, and California has taken the position that you are allowed as a brewer to also hold a grower's license in California, but you can, specifically by regulation, you cannot have them in the same facility, and you can't also have a pass-through, right? So kind of the first barrier is what are the state regulators, as they're figuring out how to be comfortable with having legalized marijuana, what types of separations are they going to make or not make, right? So you're going to have to figure out where you are in the state. But, the THC products are definitely coming out. It was interesting because when I gave this talk at CBC, someone stood up and was talking about Blue Moon, and Coors putting out a THC infused beer, but it's a non-alcoholic beer.
Right.
And from, a general perspective, that is allowable, if it's allowable under state law. So it's going to be an interesting thing to see how creative people are going to be about alcohol, non-alcohol. But as I said before, I don't see any world in which we're going to have a THC infused alcoholic beverage anytime soon.
Do you envision a world where we go to a bar and I get to order a beer and you get to order a cannabis infused beverage, or vice versa? Like, is that the future of consumption, at least on premise?
I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see it, in the next 10 years. I think that, in general, there's been a huge sort of change in terms of how folks basically equate marijuana and alcohol, and whether that's, true or not. I'm not a scientist, and I think there is some issue with the fact that there isn't a lot of good public research on marijuana because it is a controlled one substance. But I do think from where the wave is going is that, that is going to be part of the expectation. If they're equivalent products and, you're using them to socialize, that we'll get there. I think it'll take a while because, most places, even that have legalized cannabis, will not allow, there's no on-premise element to that. It's always off-premise.
Right.
So eventually.
Yeah, more like Amsterdam, I suppose.
Exactly.
Now, are you working actively with any clients right now that are looking into the space, or do you have a sense on how many breweries or alcohol companies are, trying to move into the cannabis sector?
Yeah, I would say that, sort of in my client base, that folks are kind of dipping their toes into it and they're sort of curious about it. I think, and part of this is because, I'm now at this global law firm and we have a large Canadian presence. So most of the activity that I'm seeing right now are folks that are looking at opportunities in Canada. Constellation has kind of paved the way on that, and I think it's piqued people's interest.
Yeah.
And it's also just it's a huge market. It's the whole country. So people are asking around. They want to understand it. It's obviously complicated there because you're talking about investments in other countries and.
Well, that's, I guess, the big question is like the money piece of it. How does a company like Constellation, based in New York, invest in a cannabis company in Canada?
Right.
How do they handle the money if you're not allowed to bank federally?
Right.
Any profits from a cannabis entity?
That's something I should know, and I don't. I have really, really smart partners who figure like the whole banking structure out. But yeah, I mean that's been one of the major issues, as we've legalized across the states, is that you have companies, of the size of Constellation that have these banking issues because until we relax the restrictions on cannabis proceeds, it is highly complicated about what you can do, and obviously I don't think. Constellation is doing what some folks in Colorado are doing, and buying up a lot of real estate or putting their money into other investments in cash. I mean, it's a little bit ridiculous.
Yeah. Switching gears just slightly from cannabis to other alcoholic beverage segments now. When you joined our Brewbound conference in 2016. We talked a little bit about beer companies getting into wine or spirits or other alcohol beverage sectors, and since then, I mean, it's really kind of accelerated. We've seen a lot of breweries start to open distilleries.
Yeah.
Do you still pay close attention to that now that you're so focused on cannabis? Are you still working?
Oh yeah,
with
no.
clients?
I mean, most of my, I do. I should clarify, because I have to be careful about my firm policy that, I am doing cannabis, but I have to do it very limitedly because the firm has taken a conservative, perspective on sort of where it gets in, for the same reason that companies are conservative. So the large majority of what I do is alcohol based. I mean, I think folks are still looking at, growth opportunities outside of beer. We talked about it before. I mean, in terms of marketing, and also that the laws have been changing to allow, breweries to sell and to make, distilled products and wines. And, so it's kind of a brand extension, if you can think about it that way. And I also just think, there are consumers who aren't just beer drinkers, and also if they have a beer that they like, and maybe they would also drink the vodka on a different night, I mean, it's sort of the market has changed in terms of taste. So I think that that's going to continue to be something that all alcohol manufacturers are going to be open to.
Yeah. Now, final question for you: when you do talk to these to some of your clients or to some of these companies that are looking to expand into other alcohol segments, what is the primary motivation for them wanting to do so? Is it simply that there's just more growth opportunity outside of beer right now? I mean, what are they kind of communicating to you on that front?
I think it's it's a couple of things. I mean, I think some of it is just an increased sort of product line and wanting to capture and to draw as many types of people to their tasting rooms as possible, because you can have groups of people who are yes, core craft drinkers, but they, may have partners or friends that really, want to do liquor. So it's, I think, just giving a wider net. Also, I just think, a lot of brewers are creative, and want to, try at other products. And also, I do think, craft spirits as a category is still behind craft beer in terms of, just where it is and how it's established as a category and as an industry. And so I think there is, where beer has gotten to be more flat, or sort of the growth has come down recently for brewers, it's still pretty high in the spirits world. And so I think they're looking at, I mean, wine is it's sort of the opposite of that, right? Like wine overly established.
Yep.
But I do think particularly in brewers going into spirits, that's what they're looking at, is sort of there's a lot of opportunity there. There's a lot of interest and sort of a good runway for them. Well,
if there's a way to innovate and if there's money to be made, a brewer will figure it out, I think.
Exactly right.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the time.
Alva
Mather, everyone.